And as soon as they have a few minutes to get on, I'll tell you how many attendees we have. So Commissioner Choate and Commissioner Kafalas, I think it's 6:02. You could probably start the meeting, and I would just announce, just for the beginning to the attendees, the work sessions are for the Planning Commission and Board of County Commissioners and staff and consultants to talk about items. We welcome you as attendees to come in and listen and observe what's going on. But typically we don't open attendees up for discussion during this. So just so you know, we know you're out there and we appreciate you being with us. With that, I'll turn it over to the chairman.
Go ahead, John.
Which chairman?
Meeting.
Matt.
Commissioner Kafalas, you and Bob are both kind of co-leads on this.
I'll just make a couple of quick comments, just to welcome everyone, to say thank you for your the Planning Commission and all the time that you put into all of this work, and certainly the attendees, the public. Tonight we have certain specific items, up in terms of the zoning districts update and how we're going to implement that. We'll get an update on the oil and gas regulations, and the bulk of what we'll be focusing on is reviewing the draft regulations regarding the sign code, which is, and all of these things are, well, most of these things are part of phase 2 update of the land use code. Bob, is there something you wish to add, sir?
Nope, I think you covered it. Thank you very much. So who's going to lead us in on the land use code zoning district transition strategy?
Okay, thanks, Commissioner Choate. Matt Lafferty, look, do you want to spend a few minutes and do real quick introductions before we do that, or especially for the people that are attendees that maybe don't know who we all are?
Yeah, I think that's fair. We haven't done that in a little bit, and we have quite a few people watching.
Yes.
I'll ask the planning commissioners to introduce themselves.
I'm Abby Pontius. I've been on the Planning Commission since July 2020. Happy to be here. I live in the canyon between Estes Park and Drake, and happy to be here representing. Thank you.
Curtis Miller, live in Loveland, been on the Planning Commission for a long time.
And I'm Ann Best Johnson. I've been on the Planning Commission now for 3 years, or almost 3 years, and I am in the Windsor area.
I'm Nancy Wallace. I live in the Waverly area north of Fort Collins, and I've been on the Planning Commission 14 years.
John, I think you're muted.
John Barnett, you were muted.
I like to mute myself sometimes, and you can't hear me say anything wrong. I'm John Barnett. This is my 2nd year on Planning Commission, and I live in Fort Collins.
I'm Jordana Barrick, and I live just north of Fort Collins, and this is my first official Planning Commission work session.
Welcome. Commissioner Doherty.
Hi, I'm Sean Doherty. This is my 11th year on the Planning Commission. I live in the Poudre Canyon, which is why my internet fades out here and there, but I will have that fixed by the next meeting.
Thank you.
And I'm Bob Choate. I'm on the Planning Commission. I live in the Stout neighborhood near Horsetooth Reservoir. This is my 3rd year on the Planning Commission.
Thank you. How about the Board of County Commissioners?
I'm Kristen Stevens, County Commissioner serving District 2.
Hello, I'm Jody Shattuck McNally, Larimer County Commissioner for District 3.
And I'm John Kafalis, Larimer County Commissioner, District 1. And Matt, thank you very much for suggesting that we do the introductions. Of course, that's very important. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
How about staff and consultants?
Yeah, my name's Matt Lafferty, and I'm the the long-range planning planner for Larimer County Community Development. I'm working on land use code amendments and doing that with our consultants, Clarion Associates, who will introduce themselves in just a moment. I'll let Leslie go next, and then Clarion can chime in.
Hi, everybody. Leslie Ellis, Community Development Director for the county.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Lori Cadridge, and I'm the Community Planning and Infrastructure Resources Director, and Community Development is one of the 6 departments in our service area.
Matt, would you like to introduce yourself and Elizabeth tonight?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Goebel. I'm with Clarion Associates. We are the consulting firm that's been leading the project to work with the county on the land use code. I'm here tonight with my colleague, Elizabeth Garvin.
Hey, everybody.
Okay, I think that's kind of everybody.
Actually, Matt, there are 2 other staff members, Don and Leah.
Yep, Don.
Hi, Don Threewood, Planning Manager.
And if I could, Matt Sura has also been added as a kind of a consultant with us. Matt, if you want to show yourself real quick and say hi.
Yeah, I'd love to, although says that my video is not working. Matt Sura, new special counsel on oil and gas matters, and I'll be working to, it looks like I can start my video now. Still not. All right. I will work on this and hopefully join you in a minute.
Okay. And Frank?
Sorry about that. It's having some technical difficulties, but I'm here now. Sorry.
Who are you, Frank?
What's that?
Who are you?
I am one of the attorneys for the county in the county attorney's office.
And we have Leah Schneider. Could she introduce herself?
Yeah.
Yes, of course. Hi, I'm Leah Schneider. Sorry, I'm at the vaccine clinic, but I am joining you guys. I'm with the health department. I am the environmental health planner and working with the Matt and Leslie on the oil and gas team.
Thanks, Leah. Thanks for joining us tonight. All right, I think that's everybody now. Thank you for catching those, Commissioner Kafalis. So tonight we got 3 items we're going to discuss, and Matt Goebel is going to lead off the very first topic, which is our transitional phase starting in March 31st as it relates to rezonings and whatnot with the land use. So Matt, I'll leave that to you, and I do have screen share on so you can use that if you need it.
Thank you, sir. Thanks, Matt. All right, so we have 3 items on the agenda tonight, and the first one I think is going to be pretty brief. I would put it more in the category of an update for you, really, as opposed to a big discussion item, but it's important. And you have a memo in your file that hopefully you can see on the screen now. Matt, do you see that? Okay. Hopefully you've had a chance to take a quick look at this. What the document does is really lay out a long-term transition strategy for applying the zone districts in the new land use code to the zoning map. One of the big questions that we often get when updating a code is, well, what about the map, and how often is that going to, how will that be adjusted and updated to reflect the new code? And I think the short answer is that there is some quick things that have already been done. I would put them in the category of low-hanging fruit. And then there's also some longer considerations, but it's really important to articulate the overall strategy and just get that in writing so it will help guide future decisions in terms of implementing the new code. That's what this memo does. It's a real simple memo that has a couple of different elements. The first element is starting on page 2, and it identifies, again, what I'm calling the low-hanging fruit. It's the conversions that took place upon adoption of the new land use code to convert, really just to rename existing zoning districts into some of the new district names. There were some mild, modest consolidations there between very similar districts. So for example, you see the forestry and forestry 1 districts were consolidated into a new forestry district in the new code. That whole table is here. These have already been adopted. The county staff has already prepared a new zoning map that reflects these consolidations and these new names. They are really not substantive for the most part. And the zoning map on which these are reflected will go into effect at the same time as the new code, which is the end of March 2021. So that's really the first half of the zoning transition strategy. It's the more straightforward stuff. But there is a second half to the strategy, and that's on the next page of the memo, and it's really applying the new districts. So the districts listed on the table here on the screen are new to Larimer County. Y'all don't have them. We've talked quite a bit about these over the last year, about the need for a dedicated agriculture district, for example, about the need for some new mixed use districts that might be appropriate in some of the more urbanizing areas. These districts at the top of this slide are, in the toolbox. We've always said that these would be available for future application. And ideally, these will be attractive to people. They might want to use these new districts as alternatives to their zoning now. For example, much of the county is currently zoned O, open. And a lot of property owners might decide, if their property is in ag use, that they might want to actually consider rezoning to that dedicated ag district. Perhaps it would provide a greater range of uses that are allowed, or more options for protections from boresidential development that comes in. So those are the districts that are intended for future application. The county, we bolded this language because it's really important. The county wants to make it easier to apply the new districts where they make sense. And so moving forward, I think, a range of tools will be on the table to streamline the process, to make it faster and cheaper to approve rezonings that are consistent with the plan and other plans that have been adopted and consistent with the new LUC. So I think incentives are something that will get further discussion. I think, the county might consider looking at reducing or waiving rezoning processing fees, for example, to speed up the consideration of rezonings that are consistent with the plan. That's something that will definitely be on the table. We see that in all communities that are trying to implement new districts. We also finally have a couple of optional approaches identified here. Just noting the fact that every property is different. Larimer County is big, and every parcel is going to have different considerations. And long term, I think the county might be looking at applying some districts on a very targeted small scale, and maybe sometimes it's going to be on a larger scale involving multiple properties. And so we identify 2021 as a time when voluntary rezonings will be accepted, where property owners can just come in and talk with the county and say, hey, we'd like to initiate a rezoning to one of these new districts, maybe the new ag district, for example. 2021 is really going to be, I think, the onus on the property owners to initiate those potential rezonings to these new districts. But then starting in 2022, as the staff frees up some other projects, as they get more capacity, I think they might look at county initiative rezonings. We call those legislative rezonings. And it could be that rather than waiting on applicants to initiate rezonings, maybe staff goes out and potentially talks to some property owners in situations where they feel like some of those new districts may make sense for various reasons. Obviously, that's going to be labor intensive for county staff. And so that's more kind of a longer term strategy. These can continue indefinitely. The consideration of new districts is a long-term goal that the county will always be looking at to make sure that the new land use code tools are being used effectively. And we finish off this memo by just identifying some general considerations that would be in play, for all the rezonings to these new districts. These are not unfamiliar to y'all, but just generally the things that should be looked at, whenever a potential property is looked at for conversion to a new district. Is it consistent with the intent of the new districts that have been established? What are the existing land uses and the existing, physical dimensions of the lot and the features on the site? What's the context of the area? What's nearby? Would a rezoning make sense based on the overall context? And then finally, what potential new development standards might be triggered by rezoning to a property? We have talked about tailoring the code in more kind of finer grained detail so that different standards apply to different character areas. And so maybe you don't have the same type of parking standards in a rural area that you would in an urban area. And so that's going to be one of the considerations in rezonings as well. So it's pretty straightforward, but it's important to get those principles in place and to identify that this strategy for rezonings is going to continue longer term. It's a big issue, but it's a pretty quick memo and a pretty quick overview of the policies the county has laid out. Any questions, or Leslie or Matt, anything to add to that overview of the memo? Questions from anyone?
Hey, Matt, I would just have a comment, and that would be that and this is really just a suggestion to the county commissioners, that when you get to the point where you want to pursue legislative rezoning, that, you know, you use that very big hammer very sparingly, because the presumption there is you're doing it over the objection, or at least without the direct participation of the property owners. And I do think it's a very good tool, especially in this circumstance. But I think it's important to recognize what it is, and that it's rezoning somebody's property without them applying themselves to do it. I think there's good reasons to do it, but it's just something to keep in mind.
So, Commissioner Choate, that's a good observation. I think that it would be our objective to not do something that's against the grain of the people as much as possible. We were looking at the legislative procedure as preferably being something more that is desirable, that we go out and meet with a sector of our community and show them their options and see who wants to voluntarily step in, and then make a change based upon that. And then those that maybe don't want to come along at that time aren't forced to, but they might see the benefits of them in the longer run and may voluntarily come in on their own after that. And so I agree. We don't really want to use that as a heavy-handed measure or technique.
And Commissioner, just to clarify, when I was saying property or county initiated, that's just who starts the conversation, but it's certainly not the end of the conversation. And most communities do not, go down that road very far if there's not interest and willingness by the property owners. And so that's definitely an important part of the consideration. We weren't, proposing to override property owner interests at all. Commissioner Stevens had her hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I don't think we would do anything like that without having a lot of public input and engagement. I would imagine that that's pretty common to have that. So I appreciate the, the warning, or, I mean, and I know it was intended well, but, I certainly don't think any of us would want to do anything that felt that heavy-handed without talking to neighbors and really getting buy-in. So that would certainly be my preference, and I imagine it would be the preference of my colleagues too. So,
Commissioner Kafalis. You're muted, Commissioner.
I know. Let me take my hand down. Bear with me. It will. I would concur with what the statement that Christian offered, and certainly Bob's guidance there, the Chair Choate's guidance. Questions I have is it in the long-term strategies, we're applying the new strategies where we would look at, for example, one of the zoning districts is the mobile home park M1, where we might look at strengthening that to help with the preservation of that type of housing. When does that come in? And my second question, Matt, and again, thanks for all the hard work, is when can we have a conversation about how these different zoning districts and the updates to the land use code would be supportive of managed growth, smart growth, those kinds of principles? Thank you.
Well, just to react to your first question, the M1 zone district, in this phase 2 of the land use code updates, we're talking about housing and we're talking about housing alternatives. That includes RV parks and campgrounds and some other things and tiny homes and mobile home parks. So that part will come into convert. We'll have those conversations and make sure that we get around those issues when the time is right. The second part is probably that answer your question is that'll all probably happen during that second phase as we get into that subject matter. Keeping in mind what we've got is we got a couple of buckets of items that we're going to work on throughout this year. And the housing subject's a very large one, and we'll be getting that underway here pretty soon. And we'll spend a good amount of time working on that as well. So look forward to seeing you.
Thank you, Matt. That's very helpful. And one quick follow-up, and it's mostly for my edification. So the M1 mobile home park, does that get folded into, as I look at the new zoning districts and the urban character area, does that get folded into MUN, mixed use neighborhood? What happened to that M1 zoning district?
It was actually renamed as the MHP district, the Manufactured Home Park District. So it's still there. It's just got a new name.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt.
Commissioner, on your other point about smart growth and when will these districts get evaluated for smart growth, that's a great question. And it's a phrase that honestly is, it's a bit loaded. It kind of applies, it's defined differently in different people's minds. And, what is smart growth to one person or in one county, could be different from somebody else's definition. I think that part of just the evaluation of any zoning tool, does it meet the county's plan? I think that's for us a key consideration of, is it smart growth? Is the regulation implementing the plan? And so that has been a lens that we've been looking at all the zoning tools at, as we've been writing the new code. I think we'll continue to do that through these phase 2 edits. But, I think, a lot of people would say, better connectivity is a key smart growth principle, connecting neighborhoods. And we've tried to introduce better connectivity tools, for example, through some of the new mixed use districts. And I think, and the new access and connectivity section that we introduced. Some people, for some people, smart growth is sustainability, environmental sensitivity, water conservation, those types of things. And so we've got a whole category of tools that kind of fall in that bucket as well. So smart growth it's one of those big umbrella terms that you can define in a lot of different ways. And I think we try to just look at everything on its own merits. Is it implementing the plans and does it make sense for Larimer County?
Jordana? I hope I'm pronouncing that correct.
Yes, Jordana. Thank you, Matt. And my question, it relates to the smart growth a little bit as to what you just said, Matt, but also, and forgive me, I'm new at this, and I was not part of the original conversations that set the new zone districts. But when looking at the zone districts map, I was wondering if it wouldn't be beneficial to have a district called out for the permanently protected lands, things such as the natural park, the county parks, the conservation easements. I'm just hearing conversations at the federal and state levels about certain land conservation targets. And when that comes to our county, I'm just curious if we have measurable inventory and are able to plan accordingly for some of those corridors.
So we, Jordana and others, we created during the first phase, one of the new zone districts created was called Natural Resources Zone District. And so the intent behind that district was to address land uses such as our parks and open lands properties that we own, that the cities own, probably properties that may be under a conservation easement, all our Forest Services lands. And so we'll be looking in the future to talking to the different agencies that own those types of properties and asking them whether or not it's to their benefit to rezone those properties to that, because there's some protective measures associated with that. So great question.
And that's really one of the prime examples of when a county initiated rezoning would happen. You know, when a county department like Natural Resources, you know, would propose a designation like that. John, Commissioner Barnett.
One of the things, just to comment on the idea of, are we getting to smart growth? I suspect if we take a look at the long-term history of planning in Larimer County and what has happened with land use codes over the years and adopted plans, that we are probably getting closer to what might be a consensus within Larimer County on what a definition of smart growth might be. So each time we go through this exercise, we get a little bit closer. And, you know, in spite of all the hard work and everything that everybody's put in, this isn't going to be the last time this type of effort happens. And hopefully next time we'll be able to get even closer than we are now.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's a good observation. Thank you, Commissioner Barnett. Anybody else? Not seeing anybody's hands go up or anybody jump for another question, I think that we'll wrap that subject up and we'll move on to the second item on our agenda tonight, which has been an evolving topic, and it's oil and gas. And we've been spending some time at the staff level working on a schedule to make sure that we have a good public outreach effort, and we're doing some other things, bringing on some assistance and stuff like that. And I'm going to let Leslie kind of lead a little bit of that conversation and do some introductions, and then we can have some conversation around that. So Leslie?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So as you mentioned, this topic has been evolving a bit, and the schedule has been getting refined over the last week. About a week, last Monday, the commissioners provided some direction to staff to look at a longer schedule with adoption in the July-August timeframe. We took a revised schedule to a virtual open house to the public, to the community, also on the 3rd last week, and got some general feedback there. And for the most part, we got feedback that this seemed to be going in the right direction. There was some interest in extending the time for review at the back end to make sure there was ample time for public input when there was a draft plan available, and also making sure that there was time, that it was an iterative process, in essence, that there's time to review sections of the regulations as we move forward, and that there's not, you know, kind of a surprise at the end. So with some of that feedback, we took another turn to further refine the schedule. And Matt, if you could make it a little bit larger on the screen, and we wanted to just share this approach with you and see if it's making sense. And then I'd like to also introduce with Frank Haug and Matt Sura, who will be working with us. Matt will introduce himself and talk about some of his experience and what he can bring to the team to help us as we move forward on the oil and gas regulations. So as you can see from the schedule that's up on the screen, we're, okay, sorry. It looked like some of the changes might have not gotten accepted correctly or something, but for the most part, this is the schedule. So the next big opportunity for public engagement around the topic of oil and gas is March 22nd, and that's going to be an evening event. We'll set it up as a virtual event so people can participate. And the idea is to move through the different subjects on oil and gas in kind of themed groupings of topics. And so we've been saying for a while now that we would prepare some comparative analysis. How do our county regulations relate to the state regulations and to some other jurisdiction regulations, Boulder County and the like. And so we're working on that comparative analysis. What we'll do is provide something out ahead of time before that meeting so people can review it and be ready for questions and comments. And then on the 22nd, we would basically provide that information and discuss what we think might make sense in terms of a direction forward and the sections of our code that we would work on. There would be information about how our review procedures work, and we could discuss some of the topics like registration and public notification and that kind of thing. So that's high level. And then in early April 7th or 8th, then we would move toward doing topics around land use, locations, siting, and so on. So those would be topics like land use and zoning tools that we could apply, alternative siting analysis, setbacks, reciprocal setbacks, some of the feedback that we've heard that there's interest to look at more closely, transportation infrastructure. Then we would propose moving on to address the public health, welfare, environmental standards, air quality. Of course, we've heard a lot, water quality, what's in the state standards relating to those, other environmental standards, also some of the safety issues like emergency response, some of the nuisance issues that we've been hearing about. To move on then to compliance and fees and other financial assurances and so on, and anything else that hasn't been addressed. So this is very flexible. I think if we discover other topics as we move forward, we can add them to the list, but we wanted to at least propose a starting point, and then as we move forward, we can continue to modify that. Now that would all be before we move into a public draft, and at each of those stages there would be drafts and options that we could discuss and get feedback on, and then pull those all forward into the public draft. So there shouldn't be any surprises as we get into May and June with a public draft. Commissioner Shattuck McNally, did you have a question about that? I see your hand up.
Yes, Leslie, thanks for seeing that. This is great. I like seeing the detail and stuff. So I was just wondering, when I see the public drafts, I'm assuming we're taking those at each kind of section at a time. So what kind of, do we have a plan to create kind of early drafts for review and public comment, kind of like the COGCC did during the mission change? And I think they call them straw dogs or something like that. What kind of, how are we going to get, I know you'll probably send those to us, but how do we get that out for the public? Will it be on the website, or what kind of plan do we have for those kinds of things?
Yeah, good, very good question. So the plan is that several days before these events, and you can see in the kind of bright orange, the orangey color there, those are all the deliverables and drafts. So the idea is before each session, we would have a draft, and that would be posted on the webpage. And what we'll do is start getting all these dates posted on the webpage so people can start registering for events and keep an eye out for new posted materials and that sort of thing. So yes, so each one of these, we would propose putting some information out ahead of time that people could then, absorb and be ready to talk about.
I kind of look at it as a puzzle. Where we put a puzzle together, we have a piece that we all get to look at, and then once we understand what that piece looks like, we talk a little bit about it, we make some amendments to it, then we move to the next piece, and hopefully when we get down to May or so, we can piece them all together and have one unified plan.
Thank you. I like that approach. For me too, also just focusing on one area at a time so we can kind of, focus on it and not be kind of going off on a tangent talking about another piece. I like that. So if we get down to the bottom and those pieces are kind of coming together and we still feel like we have to go back up to one of the first pieces and tweak it again so it fits better, is that going to be part of that process too, you think? Or
yeah, so probably once we get to May and then we have a public draft of the full set of regulations, if there's a piece that still needs some more attention or work, we would probably do it within that context. So on or about May 20th, the idea is that we would have a full draft that puts all those puzzle pieces together. And then that would be available for most of the rest of May and into the month of June for public input and comments. And then we'll schedule one or two open houses and opportunities for public comments and, online comments and emails and that kind of thing. So there would be, a month plus time that if there are particular parts of it that need more attention, we could do some more work. And then that would be before we'd actually generate a public hearing draft that then is available for Planning Commission consideration and Board of County Commissioners consideration. And of course, the public would also have an opportunity at each of those stages to testify and provide input to help shape the final outcome of the regulations. So that's our proposed schedule. And of course, best laid plans, we know we'll have to probably modify as we move forward a little bit, but we wanted to have something that we can start to put on calendars and people can know what to expect. Now, we will anticipate probably having a few check-ins with the county commissioners along the way on Monday afternoons to give you feedback and updates from these sessions and hear your input and guidance. If the Planning Commission would like to hear about this more frequently, then I think your next opportunity would be at a work session in June. We could look to do it another session, or you all could join along with these public discussions if you're interested in it in particular. So we'd be interested to hear your feedback too, if you want more or less or some other way of participating as we move forward. And I think that's roughly the schedule. Love any other feedback that you have about that. And then we'd like to spend a little bit of time also introducing Matt to you. Commissioner Shattuck McNally.
I just want to thank you both for this, the detail and the work that you've put into this. And I like the concept of the puzzle pieces. So thank you. I just want to say thank you for your work and your efforts on this. And thanks for explaining. I really thought that was great. Thank you.
You bet. And it's always a team effort, of course. So thanks.
And I think a lot of this, Leslie did an excellent job of listening to you, the commissioners, as well as hearing some of the concerns that were coming from the public about making enough time and around the end of the process rather than trying to group it all at the front. So kudos to Leslie for doing all that and catching that and putting it together so well.
Okay, anything else on the schedule? And so what we will do is fine tune a few of these dates that we want to checking calendars and making sure that it works for everybody. And then we'll start to post this out probably as soon as tomorrow. We can at least put this schedule out and we'll start to make opportunities for people to register for these events and see what's coming. Because I know we're getting questions from people about when are we going to talk about certain topics. So that will help everybody be prepared and know what to expect. So with that, Frank, do you want to introduce Matt or you want me to introduce Matt? You notice we have a lot of Matts on our teams these days, so it gets hard to sort through that sometimes, but I'm delighted to at least co-introduce Matt Sura to you. Matt will be working alongside our team to help us understand the landscape around Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission rulemaking and what other jurisdictions are doing in this area and just the most current thinking around that. So I know Matt has a few words to share about his experience on the subject. Frank, did you want to chime in at all, or are you good with that? You may have. Okay, I'm going to assume not. You might join us a little bit later, so maybe having technical difficulties. So Matt, sir, I know you were going to say a few words about your role and be available to answer questions and talk a little bit about the subject. And our anticipation is that we'll do the bigger, broader analysis and deeper dive on March 22nd, but we thought it would be helpful for you to at least meet Matt and hear a little bit more from him this evening.
Well, thank you, Leslie. Good evening, commissioners. I am Matt Sura and Special Counsel on Oil and Gas Matters, and I'm really excited to be here tonight and excited to work with you and your staff over the coming months on oil and gas issues. I've got a quick PowerPoint, and I'm just going to get that going right now. I expect that you could see that now. I was asked to give a brief introduction of myself and my work, so I thought that I would start by discussing the work that I've done recently on the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission mission change rulemaking that was required by Senate Bill 181. I've been working on oil and gas issues since 1996, first as an organizer with a nonprofit organization called Western Colorado Alliance out of Grand Junction. And then for the last 10 years as an oil and gas attorney working with local governments, nonprofit organizations, landowners, and mineral owners, basically everybody but the oil and gas industry. I started working my work in the Piceance Basin on the western slope of Colorado. It's over here for Western Colorado Alliance, and I've been working as an attorney out of my office in Longmont, Colorado, in the Denver-Julesburg Basin. In Colorado, oil and gas is regulated by three entities primarily: the Colorado Gas Conservation Commission, or COGCC, the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, or Air Quality Control Commission, really, and local governments. And I regularly practice before the Colorado Gas Conservation Commission and the Air Quality Control Commission. And for the past 10 years, I worked for over 9 local governments on oil and gas issues. One of the biggest thrills of my career is the passage of Senate Bill 181, which dramatically changed the way that oil and gas is regulated in Colorado. First, and these are both as important, it gives local governments clear land use authority over oil and gas and ended state preemption. And it also reforms the Colorado Gas Conservation Commission mission. They're no longer in the business of fostering or promoting oil and gas development. They're now in the business of protecting public health and safety, which is a huge mission change shift, and required them to write new regulations almost from top to bottom over the last year. And that was called the mission change rulemaking. Probably, in my view, one of the best things to come out of 2020, which was a kind of terrible year in other respects. Of course, I'm an oil and gas attorney, and so that's the lens I look at things through. I was fortunate to represent 8 entities in the rulemaking, including local governments, community groups, water provider, school districts. And I've prepared a few slides just to talk about some of the issues that I worked on for my clients, just to give you a sense of the work that I've done in the past, and give you a little bit of a sense as to some of the more important provisions that are in the Colorado Gas Conservation Commission mission change rules. The first is an alternative location analysis, which is something that local governments supported, requiring operators to analyze if alternative drilling locations exist and to choose a location that would prevent or minimize impacts of the oil and gas development. School district client advocated for increasing setbacks from school lands to 2,000 feet. Coalition of local government and water providers advocated for increasing setbacks to protect public water supply wells and surface water. The setback from public water supplies is now 1,000 feet. Earlier it was 300 feet, and they didn't give any protection to public water supply water wells. And they also included a list of chemicals that are used in hydraulic fracking fluids that are now banned in the state of Colorado to protect water. We also reduced noise limits and put a ban on routine flaring of natural gas. But I think that what Colorado can be proud of is that all of these issues passed with unanimous support from the Colorado Gas Conservation Commission, and ultimately with support from the oil and gas industry as well. In the coming weeks, I'm going to be working with your staff to compare the standards in Larimer County Land Use Code with other local governments and the new Colorado Gas Conservation Commission rules. And I really look forward to working with you and your staff and all stakeholders on this process. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt. So I think we can take questions or comments that anybody has about the topic tonight, but we were probably planning to spend the bulk of the rest of the time more on the sign code, and then plan to reconvene on the 22nd to spend more time on this topic. So does anybody have questions or comments or follow-up? Commissioner Stevens.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to Matt and welcome and look forward to working with you on this issue. We have a lot of residents that are probably listening at this point and may not have known that we were looking to hire a lawyer to help us with this process. So we appreciate your presentation and the work that you've done at the state level, and we look forward to working on our oil and gas regulations alongside of you.
Thanks so much.
Commissioner Shattuck McNally.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to say, welcome, Matt. It's great to have you on board. We are grateful for, staff and all of us being able to work alongside you to help us work through this process. And I'm really excited to get to see you here tonight, and just welcome to the team and to Larimer County. And we're very excited to have you here. Thank you.
Honored to be working with you. Thanks, Commissioner.
And you got a thumbs up from Commissioner Kafalis. The planning commissioners want to chime in? More thumbs up. All right. We're good to go. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I think we can move on to our final subject of the evening, which is the sign code. So I'll pass it back to Matt Lafferty and Elizabeth.
Yeah, this is all part of that first bucket of items, and we're kind of on a fast track with the sign code, kind of like we started with the oil and gas. So thankfully we got Elizabeth Garvin from our consulting group, who's very familiar with signage. She's worked with a lot of signs, working on sign codes around the country, and we really appreciate her efforts. She's managed to, in the last couple of weeks, put together the first draft of sign regulations for the county. It's not at all final. It's just a preliminary draft, so we can start generating public comment and comment from you guys. We have posted the draft online, and we're looking for public comment out there. We've provided notice to the industry that's out there, and we welcome everybody's feedback on that. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth. She's got a great slide presentation for us tonight, and she'll lead us through the conversation. Thank you, Elizabeth.
We're not hearing you, Elizabeth.
She has a great slide presentation. She just doesn't talk about it very well. No, still waiting. Nope. You can read your lips.
Let's see.
Technology, it never works when you really want it to. It just throws you for a loop.
How about now?
Yes, ma'am.
Awesome. Okay. I was not going to attempt to sign the sign show because I do not have any control over American Sign Language. So let's go ahead and start the PowerPoint, if possible. Matt Goebel, we good?
No, I don't see it yet.
Okay. Let's see.
We having problems with the PowerPoint coming up?
Yeah, hold on. Oh, technology hates me today.
Do you want to email it to me, Elizabeth, and I can run it from here?
Yep, hold on. Okay, I'm gonna see if I can pull this up.
It's coming.
There we go.
There you go.
Okay, I'm just gonna sit quietly because Zoom's crashed on me every day this week. Maybe not today. Okay. Good evening, everybody. I'm Elizabeth Garvin with the Clarion Project team. We've all been hanging out together for the last year or so, a little bit more than that. So just to get us started tonight, we are doing the sign code, as Matt and Leslie said, and we are on our second conversation about the draft sign code and the sign code update. And we took away from our last workshop meeting some sign code update goals, and these are in keeping with the big picture of the project. So we've been working to prepare targeted updates. We are not doing a comprehensive rewrite. We don't want anybody to be surprised by a new huge sign going up somewhere in the county that you didn't see coming. So we're starting small and we're cleaning up and we're refining and we're meeting our specific goals. Our substantive goals are to more clearly link the sign code purposes to the county comprehensive plan and the county sign priorities. So when you have a chance to look through the draft that's public now, we have expanded that purpose list to broaden it out to remind everybody that the sign code has lots of users and constituencies, and we want to reflect a little bit of everybody in that sign code purpose statement. We are working to balance and align the sign code across the different county character areas and with your municipal partners. And that's going to be a lot of our conversation this evening. How are we aligning the sign code? We are redrafting the code to ensure compliance with all emerging legal parameters and to clarify technical and enforcement provisions as needed. So we want this code to get you into the next 15, 20 years of sign regulations in a solid place. And then finally, we are updating the current regulations to provide an expanded menu of sign types and really clarify, maybe not expand, but clarify what's permitted where and what the regulations are that go with that. And then to address ongoing technology changes. Signs are changing. And so we want the county to be in a place to know what they're saying yes to and what they're saying no to, because they've had the conversation before the sign comes in the door. So let's go on to the next one. You have received in your packet this evening both the current code and the draft code, and you can tell them apart by the amount of color in each. The current code is a lovely black and white version, very streamlined and minimalist. The new code is multicolored and has images in it. So just to kind of give you a roadmap of where we are in the reorganization, we've kept the general provisions at the beginning. We have built up the applicability section so everybody's clear about when they need to come to the county and get a sign code and when the sign that they'd like to put up is exempt or perhaps prohibited. We are building a section of generally applicable sign standards for permanent signs to the extent that there are standards that are applicable no matter where you put a monument sign. It goes in this section. The next section, permanent sign regulations by character area, that is, if you want to put a monument sign in a conservation area, we're going to have specific size standards for it. So the first one is generally applicable, and the second one is by character area applicable. And this is a place where we're taking the current rural and residential and non-residential sign code regulations, and we're applying them to the character areas. So as the county moves forward in implementing those character areas, the sign regulations are in place when someone comes in with a sign application. We've pulled all of the temporary sign regulations into one location. They were a little mixed in with some of the other signs. So we're pulling them together. So if somebody wants to do temporary signage, they're able to go to that part of the code and look for their event or activity or use and understand what type of signage they'll be able to have associated with what they're up to. We've carried forward the existing non-conforming sign regulations, haven't made changes to those. We have also carried forward the installation and maintenance regulations. We've temporarily put the sign permit procedures into the sign code. I don't think they will stay here. Once the code gets adopted back into the full land use code, that sign permit section should go back into the full procedural section. But sometimes we know that people want to see what the permitting requirements are. And sometimes it might be relevant to all of us in the drafting process to think about whether or not we want to have all signs go through an administrative permit process, or there might be situations where we want some different sort of oversight over that signage. So that's one of the reasons that we put the permits back in for the drafting process and then relocate it where it belongs into the full code when we're finished. We have taken all of the measurement and calculation instructions and put them in one place. So any of us know if we are putting up a sign that has individual lettering, how the county is going to measure the area of that sign. And then finally, we've done a lot of work in cleaning up the definitions, bringing them into a current place, making them more content neutral, and making sure that everything in the code is defined. So the draft that's out there now, this is the content that you're going to see in it. So what's been updated in this version of the draft? And I believe we'll be doing more updating after our conversation with you this evening. So as I mentioned, the purpose statements have been expanded. A number of provisions have been made content neutral. Everyone knows moving into this, that content neutral was one of the things that the county needed to work with. And so we've changed out some places where it could be read as perhaps not as neutral as possible and fixed it. We are working to move away from the on-premises, off-premises distinction for signage. And so in this draft, it's been eliminated. I think we might have some follow-up conversations to make sure that the signs are going to work the way everyone anticipates they will. As I mentioned earlier, we collected all the generally applicable standards into a single location. We've allocated the signage by character area, collected the temporary signs, kind of repeating myself here. We have worked on expanding the definition of abandonment. One of the ways the county can ask a sign owner to remove a sign that is non-conforming or no longer used is when the sign's been abandoned, and we want to have a clear process in place and a shared understanding of what abandoned is. We've updated the definitions and we've started including graphics. We will probably include more graphics by the end of the drafting process, but we want, at least in this version of the draft, to make sure that when we're talking about signage, we're all talking about the same thing. So if I want to talk about a pole sign, I can look to the images on the right, and this kind of tells us all what a pole sign is. And each of the different sign types now has at least one photograph to go with it. Most of them also have a basic set of measurement instructions with them. So when we regulate signs, we really want to make sure we're all thinking about the same kind of sign and seeing the same kind of sign. So that is one of our goals in this process. So what's remained the same? The exempt signs have not been changed. They've been reorganized to make them easier to find, categorized. The prohibited signs have not been changed, again, reorganized and categorized to make them easier to find. The sign permissions for rural and urban areas are the same. They have been allocated across the new character areas, but we haven't changed the amount, types, or sizes of signage that different uses and zone districts can have. Similarly, the sign permissions for temporary signs have not changed. So we've reorganized it within the code, but what you could do under the current code, you can still do under the draft code. And that's a subject that we're going to talk about in a little bit. We haven't changed the non-conforming sign regulations, and we haven't really changed much in measurement and calculations. We've proposed some language for measuring a sign that sits below a road right of way, just to make sure that the sign can be seen. I think that's probably the biggest change in there. So I'm going to move into substance just a little bit. We called you all here this evening because we actually are looking for some feedback, some guidance on where to go with some of the bigger policy issues related to signage in Larimer County. And we've talked about how we want to have this conversation with you and kind of the best way to get feedback. And we've organized our questions into 3 kind of topical questions. And I'm going to share them with you now, but then we're going to go through a little more information, particularly on the alignment question, and then we're going to stop and have some conversation about it. So our first question is, how should the county align the county sign regulations with your municipal partners, particularly for the permanent signage, so the permanent freestanding and the permanent attached, building attached signs, and for electronic message displays? So what does alignment look like? We're going to talk about that in a minute. Our second bigger picture question is, do the current sign standards adequately address signage in the character areas, especially the mixed center areas? I mentioned in the previous 2 slides that we really haven't changed up how much signage everybody gets. We've just made sure that the right character areas get the right signage. But we do have this one place, the character areas of the mixed center areas, and that might include like Red Feather Lakes or LaPorte. These are not municipal, they're not GMA, but they are perhaps more developed commercially than some parts of the county. And so we want to understand whether carrying forward the current regulations is where we want to go with this particular set of districts in the mixed center character area. And then finally, we want to see if you've got any input for us about the current temporary sign regulations and or the temporary sign enforcement issues. We met with staff early on. We did hear some enforcement issues, and we're looking for your feedback and opinions and input about anything to do with temporary signs, so we know if there are any changes that we're going to need to think about in that section. So I'm going to start the interactive part of this presentation. So one of our charges is to understand and address alignment with municipal sign codes. So your partners in Fort Collins and Loveland and Tinmouth and Estes Park. The first thing we asked ourselves is, how do we understand what alignment is? And through a conversation with staff, we proposed to you these 4 concepts that we will use to move ourselves into drafting a county code that is aligned with the municipal sign codes. And for us, we believe that means creating sign regulations that are appropriate for Larimer County, and that first, create a bridge to municipal standards by establishing key shared regulations. So things that we both agree the county can regulate and that municipality can regulate, and it works well to accomplish good signage. Secondly, establishing a backstop by not allowing the installation of signs in GMAs that exceed what the municipality would permit, or that would result in signs that become non-conforming upon annexation. So where's that place of overlap that might be, kind of the most conservative signage allowed by the most conservative community, but it means that the sign that goes up stays conforming and stays legal, whether it's in the county or the municipality. Our third point about alignment is that it's important to maintain the differences between county regulations and municipal regulations on some topics. And that might be topics like enhanced sign design and required landscaping. Your municipal partner, Loveland, has extensive sign design regulations and landscaping regulations. And it may be that we think that is really great in Loveland, but it's not exactly how the county views sign regulations. I'm not sure. I put those in as 2 examples, and that could be where we go, but we're certainly looking for, is there a place where something is municipally appropriate and really not what someone would expect in the county, and not what the county expects of itself. And then finally, our 4th key point on alignment is that we don't want to promote a system that requires Larimer County to adopt and enforce multiple municipal sign codes. You have awesome staff, but this might not be the best use of their time. So we're trying to come up with a place where we work together well, but we don't overstep or understep. So I think I want to stop here, Matt and Leslie, and see if anybody wants to weigh in on alignment. If you've got anything that you want to share with us about whether we're, kind of aiming for the right place here.
Very good. Thanks, Elizabeth. Before I move on, anybody want to have comments?
I'll make a comment here. I think that this is an admirable goal, this municipal alignment. The one thing I always think about, especially when you're talking about properties that are in the the growth management area, which growth management areas with the municipalities in Larimer, our GMAs are pretty broad. They reach out pretty far.
Mm-hmm.
And I always think we want to encourage these properties to annex so that these developments occur within the cities and towns, and so that those cities and towns can be the ones to provide, the necessary utilities and things like that for these developments. With signs, there's the cities and towns there's no services that they really need to provide. And so the owner of the property is not incentivized by any sort of market standard to do that, except unless we make them do it. And I agree, you're not making them do that. But I also want to caution that, if we were to adopt or enforce the city sign code, what we're doing is we're enforcing the city's standards, and the property owner doesn't have a vote for those people. They're not representative of those people because they're not in the city. And so, I think it's very good to align. And I guess what I would recommend is to basically say, we're going to come up with our own standards, and here's what they are. And then we include something in the code that says, but the county can make more specific standards in the course of negotiating a CPA or something like that. And so we can look at it on a case-by-case basis. So you can look and say, hey, Loveland, that's too much. We don't want to make our requirements so detailed as what you have. But we will say, okay, we're not going to allow, we're going to have a toned down version of it, and we'll put that into our CPA. So anyway, that's just my idea. I like the municipal alignment. I just want to make sure that it makes sense based on property owners in the unincorporated area who are answerable to their own elected officials and have that outlet, because they can't go to city council for a town they don't live in and have any headway.
Commissioner Choate, I appreciate your comments on that. And I agree. I think so that we're all kind of on the same page. Alignment in our mind is not to adopt city sign regulations. Otherwise, we'd have 7 different sets of regulations or 8 for the county, and that would be hard to administer. It's to actually look at each group's regulations across the board. And Elizabeth will have a part of this in her presentation in a few minutes, where we look at what is the sign allowance and how does Loveland calculate it? How does Fort Collins calculate it? How does Windsor calculate it? And then look at what what is a reasonable expectation in those things whereby we can adopt our own standard, but in adopting our standard, we minimize the potential for creating non-conforming situations when they do annex to the city. So we may have some of the more restrictive of standards than most places would have where appropriate. And then there might be some places where we have to consider something different. But the idea is, and that's how we did our last sign code. We did it that way. What happened though is some of the municipalities started changing their sign regulations and we never kept up with that, those changes. But I appreciate your concern on that. And I think that's a very, very valid concern. But I want to be clear, we're not trying to adopt somebody else's regs. We just want to make sure that we're creating a sign regulation that does not create a series of nonconformities throughout the county when they're annexed.
Matt, there are a couple hands up.
Yeah, Commissioner Stevens?
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And, I do hear the point about, the people that live in those GMA areas aren't represented by the council at that point. So I do like, but that being said, I do like the idea of having the backstop, not allowing signs that are immediately going to be non-conforming the minute that there's annexation. And I do think that that'll just, I think it's being a good neighbor and a good partner with our municipal partners. And so people know that there's been conflict in the past. And so I do think that, I think respecting the way that the look that communities want to have is really important. That being said, I don't think we should adopt, 10 different, sign codes. I think we should have our own, but I think within that there's the ability to align and work better with our municipal partners than we may have in the past.
Thank you. And that was Commissioner Steffens. Sorry, I mispronounced that. Commissioner Doherty.
No, it is Stevens. It is Stevens.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Matt. So a couple of quick things. I do think that in the GMA, if we follow the same standards that we do when it comes to zoning and development, and if one of the municipalities has a certain sign code in their municipality, I believe that in their GMA, we should follow that code, my opinion. I had a couple of other questions though, and that's for the same reasons that Commissioner Stevens said, is why not allow the consistency across the lines of a property that will get annexed in? The second thing though is I'm wondering why we are not trying, and maybe I missed it, but why are we not basing some of the sign sizes and heights based upon speeds and lane of traffic? For example, I-25, if one of the reasons for doing these changes is to promote safety and reduce crashes, why wouldn't we allow a larger sign that can be read at 75 miles an hour versus requiring to go by one specific sign standard that will have people trying to read it and not really being able to do so? I'd really like to try to see if there's something in there about that. And then one last thing is, do we not allow new billboards anywhere in the county at this point? Because I've never understood why any municipality would not allow billboards when appropriate and there's enough space for it. So thank you.
Those are all good comments, Commissioner Doherty, and we'll take them into consideration. Yes, currently we do not allow billboards. The county has not allowed billboards for as long as I've been here anyways. We do allow signs that are larger and whatnot, but we don't allow billboards as billboards are defined by certain things. But we'll take a hard look at that. And I think you have some good comments about looking at size and whatnot based upon how the public views that from their vehicle and making sure that we don't create situations where it's unsafe. So thank you for those comments. Commissioner Bess Johnson.
Thank you. So the only thing I have to add is that if the sign code is to be in a GMA is to be mirrored with that local community's sign code, that it's very careful that the county doesn't say if and when you should annex into this community, your sign is going to be automatically not a nonconformity, because that community could change their sign code and the county isn't keeping pace with that change. And so I would hate for a property owner or business owner to have been told, we're approving you, and if you ever annex, you're going to be okay with your sign, not a problem. It sets the county up for a potential issue or conflict between that business if any guarantee is made, because the county can't guarantee that a sign is going to be conforming at the time of annexation when that municipality may change their mind. So I just want the county to be careful.
Very good point. Very good point. And of course, you could approve a sign today, and what you're saying is 5 years from now, that municipality could have changed their sign code, and when it annexes, it all of a sudden becomes nonconformity. And hopefully we continue to work together as communities to catch those things as we're going along. But that's a very good point. Anybody else before we move on with the presentation, because there's still more information to present on signage. This was to evoke conversation around what we do in the municipal areas, and I think we've got some pretty solid direction, unless you want to add to that.
It seems, this is Nancy, it seems to me
Yes.
that we could resolve some of these issues by taking a position that's relatively in the middle. In other words, we don't want to rule out any kinds of signs, make them too big, too small, too frequent, too whatever. And if we come somewhere in the middle, I would think that that would meet most of the criteria of the municipality sign zones. I mean, as long as we don't go crazy with restrictions and we don't go crazy with allowing kinds of things, we should be able to come up with a sign code that's moderate and that meets the requirements of the needs of the community, and yet meets also the municipalities. I just think it doesn't mean we have to do exactly what they do, but our sign code should be moderate and should reflect the community's desires.
Very good. Thank you for those comments.
I'm thinking to use Commissioner Wallace's comments to share with everybody sort of what the challenge is as we move forward. Yep. Okay.
Here we go.
So this is where we're starting. This is what we're shooting for. And so we did a deeper dive into all of those codes that are out there to think about what does it look like to meet these criteria. So we started with the question of aligning with the municipal partners for permanent freestanding and attached signs and for electronic message display signs. So let's start here. So freestanding signs, and I realize that this slide is super busy, so I'm going to just walk us through the very bottom line of the slide. So this is how much signage of what type you can have for freestanding signs, so freestanding or pole signs or monument signs in 4 of the communities that are your municipal partners. So we looked at Fort Collins, Loveland, Windsor, and Estes Park. And you'll see across the top, one of the, and I promised you we'll do the bottom line. We'll do it in a minute. If you see right across the top though, one of the first issues we bump into is how the different communities measure how much total signage you're allowed to have. So in Fort Collins and Loveland, they use pretty much the same standard. You get 2 square feet of sign area for 1 lineal foot of building frontage, up to 200 lineal feet of building, and then after that, 1 foot of sign area. So we get into math pretty quickly here. So Fort Collins and Loveland say, well, we're going to give you about the same amount of signage for your building because we're going to use basically the same measurement for it. But then we move over to Windsor. And so, if Fort Collins and Loveland are, France, Windsor's Italy. They're going completely different direction here. They measure how much signage you get by sign type by use. So you want a freestanding sign and you are a major tenant in an office park or shopping center or some other place where you could be a major tenant, you get X amount of signage. If you're a large scale tenant, you get a different amount of signage. And then we move over to Estes Park, which sort of follows the same route as Fort Collins and Loveland, but not the same amount. So in Estes Park, you're going to get 1.5 square feet of sign area per lineal foot of building frontage. So how wide is your building across the public street that it faces? And then in Estes, they say, well, as a matter of fact, we like counting the second story too. So you'll get a little allocation for the lineal feet of your second story, and we'll calculate your signage based on that. So just comparing these 4 sign codes, you realize that we are starting out in different places. With the maximum amount of signage that we can have per building is different based on the community that you're in. And your expectation is based on the amount of signage, the total overall amount of signage you're allowed to have. So if I can bring everybody down to the bottom of the slide, we're going to read across the line that says pole sign. So for every community, we're in a general commercial and industrial classification, and we're thinking about a pole sign. That's a standing sign on a pole or 2 poles. So in Fort Collins, you can have one primary pole sign per frontage because they also have secondary signage. And that sign can be in its face between 20 and 90 square feet, depending on how far you set it back from the roadway. And in height, it can be between 10 and 18 feet, depending on how far you set it back from the roadway. So if we keep going over to Loveland, you get 1 per street frontage. It's a little bit different. You get Fort Collins is a primary sign, Loveland is a sign. Loveland sign can be between 12 and 75 square feet. And you can get a bonus amount of square footage. Your sign can get bigger if you design it according to the city standards. It can only be between 8 and 12 feet tall. So while Loveland talks about freestanding signs, 8 to 12 feet is not super tall for a pole sign, really. Kind of short. You're more in monument category there. And they say that they really only allow pole signs in sight triangles where you can go up to 14 feet, so the sign will clear where you're supposed to see stuff, and along the I-25 corridor. So they didn't expressly prohibit pole signs, but they're really not making it worth your while to do that. We move into Windsor, and then you might be able to get 1 per street frontage based on qualifying sign type. It's a sliding scale of size based on your tenancy, like we talked about a minute ago, and a sliding scale of height based on your tenancy, like we talked about a minute ago. Finally, Estes Park, pretty straightforward. You get 1 per property, and that needs to include all your tenants. It's 120 square feet maximum and 25 feet high. So we're really in pole sign territory there. So if we come back and look, we have a height range differential between 6 and 25 feet, a size range between 20 and 120 square feet. So if we think back to alignment, what we're going to try to do is find a place where we hit on the key aspects here, and we put the county in a position of regulating in a place that gets us to the important parts of these regulations, but maybe doesn't take on all of them. I'm going to do just a couple more slides like this because I know everybody's reading this going, oh my gosh, I have things to say. Let me do a couple more and then we'll stop for conversation again. So attached signs, these are signs that are attached to the structure, pretty straightforward. Let's read across awnings together, just across the top. So Fort Collins has specific regulations for awnings. Sign on the awning, this is not the awning, the sign on the awning has to be less than 10 square feet, the lesser of 10 square feet or 10% of the awning if it's residential, and it's bigger if it's commercial, right? Lesser of 35 square feet or 25% of the awning. Okay, good. We move into Loveland, much larger for commercial awning signs, can go up to 50 square feet. If you have a non-residential use in a residential district in Loveland, you can do 20 square feet of awning signage or canopy signage. If you're in Windsor, you can have a property identification sign, and the code doesn't specify it can be an awning sign or non-awning sign. So it could be, in theory, a 2-foot awning sign, or a non-residential use, like a religious use in a residential district, they could get 24 square feet of signage. It seems like it could be awning or not. And then if you're commercial, it's a little different. You get 12 square feet on the balance of the awning, and you get 10% of the whole rest of the awning you can cover in signage. And then finally, Estes covers it all in canopy signs, and they take you back to the maximum signage you were allowed. And they say, if you want to use up some of your maximum signage, which was the 1.5 square feet of signage per linear foot of building, you can take some of it out and put it into awning signs, or you can take some of it out and put it into wall signs. You could do some of it as canopy signs. Do what you want. Get back to us. We'll see if that's okay. So again, everybody's just a little bit different. Same kind of signs, different way of looking at it. And so last one, we got some regulatory topics here. So we compared across some of the big concepts that typically come up in the sign code update. How are the regulations organized? Fort Collins has sign districts. And to Commissioner Doherty's question, they have some specialized districts. So they have a residential neighborhood sign district. If we scoot over to Loveland, we can see that they did carve off I-25 corridor and the Highway 34 corridor, and they're doing different kinds of signage in there. Windsor has zoning-based sign regulations, but they created sub areas for downtown and the I-25 corridor. Estes Park straight up by zone districts, and Timnath by zone districts, and then they do a sliver of locations within an 1/8 of a mile of I-25 get a certain kind of signage. So if we read across the billboards row, Fort Collins prohibits billboards and they prohibit off-premises signs. Typically those things go together. Loveland doesn't define billboards. They allow a freestanding sign size maximum of 75 square feet, unless you're in the I-25 corridor, and then they have a maximum of 180 square feet. Windsor prohibits pole-mounted signs and off-premises signs. I'm trying to think if there's a loophole in there. I suppose you could do an on-premises very large monument sign. I don't know if you're getting to billboard with that though. Estes Park prohibits billboards. It's defined as an off-premises sign with a sign face of more than 200 square feet. And Timnath prohibits off-premises signs. In the I-25 sign corridor, they allow signs to go up to 196 square feet. So that's kind of the last of the overviews of the different sort of topical regulations and the sign type regulations. We've got one more detailed slide, and then we're out of this sign purgatory that we're in. And this is to take a look at electronic message displays. And the first line, the first row across here is to tell you that this sign type is called different things in different places. So I'm thinking about a digital sign that can do all the whoop-de-doo stuff. In Fort Collins, it's an electronic message center. In Loveland, it's electronic message sign. The electronic message is usually part of what's in there. The end piece might be different. So one of the questions that we know that we want to explore with you is, where does the county want to go with this technology? And does the county want to allow electronic message signs? And if they want to allow them, how do they want to allow them? And so we created this particular slide to give us an overview of how they're regulated across your municipalities. One of the places that I'm going to focus on almost to the bottom is the static or animated row. So static or animated is how the sign owner uses the effects in the sign. Does it have messages roll in? Does it have messages scroll out? Does everything turn into little fireworks? Is there video running in the background? Is there animation running in the background, which is changing images? Is there video running in the background, which is truly more like a television show? And so if we look across the static or animated row, we see again that everybody's just a little different. So Fort Collins, it says the sign is going to be static and you can't use those effects. Message up, message change. That's what you get to do. In Loveland, you can use some effects in between messages. You can use specifically the fade or the dissolve. Those are two that you're allowed, the rest you're not. Windsor, similar to Fort Collins, static sign, no effects. Message up, message change. That's it. No fireworks, no dissolves. Estes Park is a little more wide open. They allow some effects in transition. So in between messages, that's our transition. You could maybe fade or dissolve, or you could have little flowers growing up. The text itself has to remain static. And they're specific that even though they're letting you use transitions, you can't use the background animation and you can't use video. And Timnath has prohibited electronic message boards. So I am going to stop talking about all kinds of signs, and I'm going to back up to our questions and see if you guys want to share some thoughts with us, some information, and some preliminary feedback. It's a lot to cover, and we're certainly not asking you to dive in and give us parameters for regulation. That's not what we're looking for, but we're looking for some guidance to move forward and figure out if there's some consensus of thought about how to get to the alignment place and specifically how to address electronic message display signs.
Awesome. Thanks, Elizabeth. That was great.
Thank you.
And I think that those slides with the details on them go a long way to showing that this is going to be a very complex issue of trying to figure out what works well for Larimer County and still responds to our municipal partners. So complex issue. Anybody want to be the first to shoot at this? Ann, you're up first.
So why not? Go try to go first. I really don't know how to address the degrees of difference between all of those different communities and the difficult spot that you, Elizabeth, find yourself in to try to come to common ground. So on that, I might just say good luck, wish you well.
Thank you. You're the best. Wait, you are the best. Okay, thank you.
But as far as electronic messaging goes, in rural areas, which unincorporated Larimer County, there are some very rural areas. I really don't think that electronic message boards are appropriate in rural areas. The nits that they emit is very different than lumens for ground spill. Sometimes those nits can be visualized from miles away. I have very sensitive eyes, and the intensity of the light carrying over miles can be very damaging. And so my personal opinion from experience and as a planning professional, I just don't think that electronic message boards are appropriate in the very rural areas of Larimer County.
For everybody's edification, NIT is not have anything to do with head lice. It has to actually do with the amount of brightness that illumination that a sign occurs. I had to look it up today myself, and when I typed in, lice came up. So that's why.
Yes, you won't. Yes.
Everybody relates that a little bit different as well.
I agree with Ann absolutely on the electronic lights. I just think in the county that's probably not something that we want to have introduced in the county. In the urban growth areas, though, I wonder if a way to deal with this might be to sort of hit the lowest level of the various municipalities in the urban growth areas, so that if you're if you're in an urban, and not just necessarily for the electronic lights, but for a variety of these issues, is to try to come up with a plan that would use the least or the most restrictive, the least allowable signage in those urban growth areas. And then also, I don't know if we wanted to go to that route, whether we want to change them in those areas, but I think with our new code that we could use the different levels of our code to also to do the signage. So if you're in a urban growth area where you're going to have more people, your signage could be more. So I don't call it more advanced. Personally, I think I'd rather do without any signage, but if I don't think we can do that, and so that you need a way to kind of do a something that makes some sense so that people have an expectation. And you know, also you don't want to have people from Loveland or people in the middle part of the county saying, well, you know, you got to change this here, but you're not going to change it when you get closer to Fort Collins. So I think it has to be consistent, and it should be somewhat conservative in terms of the signage that's allowed.
So I agree with most of what Nancy and Ann just said. I don't think signs are a problem generally. I think that both in our cities and towns and our unincorporated areas that, you know, Larimer County looks pretty good to me. I think that, you know, I-25 is just different than everywhere else. You know, I mean, maybe up north it's a rural area and it doesn't really, it's not the same, but it would be nice if you know, Fort Collins and Loveland and Timnath and Windsor could, and Larimer could all agree on, well, this is what we think, you know, I-25 should look like, both as it relates to signs and otherwise. But I don't, you know, there are multiple electronic signs in those areas on 925. I think they're all pretty reasonable. There's the one as an example that's not in Larimer, it's further down south on I-25 that you can see. And it's so, and you know what I'm talking about. It's so bright that I have to, if I'm driving at night, I literally have to do this to block it. And even that, you know, it's like the size of it is not a big deal. It's just how bright it is. And so I think that electronic signs should be allowed in appropriate areas, even if it's just along I-25. I just want to clarify, because one, it was the first of the two questions that you went back to, Elizabeth. And I guess it has to do with my understanding of the word backstop, because what we described backstop was, you know, not allowing signs that would become non-conforming upon annexation, which means that it meets the requirements of the sign code of the municipality at the time that it's approved in the county. That's what that means to me.
Yeah,
but
I think Ann clarified that. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
No,
off.
I think Ann clarified that it's a little more challenging, I realized through this conversation, because of time, right? And you were about to add to that.
Yeah, I'm not talking about if they change their code in the future, right? I mean, that's a good comment from Ann, but what I was talking about is if you say that it has to be, it can't be non-conforming if as soon as it's annexed, and there's no change from the city's sign code, what you're saying is it has to meet the city's sign code now, even though it's not in the city. That's what it says to me. But what Nancy was saying is there, you know, is more like a compromise about, and what I understood Elizabeth to be saying was, it's, you know, we're going to look at the key issues and not just all of it, right? Not, you know, we're just going to look at these key issues about what. So I just didn't understand. I wanted to make clear what my thoughts were on that, because I don't know that we're all on the same page. You know, putting in a backstop that says it is not non-conforming if it's annexed the day after it's approved just means that you're applying the city's sign code, period. And I wanted to know whether that was what we're going for.
Well, I think that there's a couple of things on there. It used to be, and I can't guarantee that it's the way it is, and I'm going to use Fort Collins as an example. It used to be that if a sign was permitted in the county, and then when Fort Collins annexed the property, that sign was deemed non-conforming, the city had a 7-year amortization program that said, you're allowed to maintain the non-conforming sign for a period of 7 years for the purposes of getting the value out of the sign. And after 7 years, we think that that's an appropriate amount of time for you to come into compliance. So each municipality may treat that issue different, but that's how it was treated in one case in Fort Collins, or used to be. I don't know if they continue with that program today.
I'd have to look at it, but I don't think they're allowed to do that. I don't think you can amortize this non-conforming for and set a sunset on it. I mean,
So-
we can ask Frank, he's the attorney.
Hey, Matt, this is Lori. I think I can clarify what you're speaking of in Fort Collins. That had to do with the Southwest annexation. And then there was a phase-in period for sign compliance after that annexation occurred.
And Bob, this is Frank. I don't have an answer off the top of my head about the amortization thing, but I'll look into that and see if I can get one for you.
And it's fine. I just didn't, the whole thing about setting a backstop, which means that it would not be non-conforming if it were annexed the next day, is not the same thing as what Nancy described as a compromise and what Elizabeth described as, looking at what those key indicators are and for with our communities and trying to match that. And I agree with what Nancy said. I agree with what Elizabeth said. I just want to make sure that we understand what that means. It doesn't mean that you have to meet the city sign code, because I just don't think that that's reasonable. We don't do that, strictly for any other type of zoning regulation.
So what I think, based on what you guys have all said, is that we have established a good goal for ourselves at this point. And the deeper we dive into the various municipal regulations, the more we're probably going to flag problems with hitting that goal. And so what I would hope is that as we do that over the next few weeks, we figure out, that helps us figure out where the place is, where the backstop is located, and whether or not we can hit this goal. I think we can start out saying we would like to go here because we'd like to do those key things. We may find across 7 sign codes that there are 2 or 3 key things that we just can't get in the same place. And then the next conversation is, okay, what's the best thing for the county in our drafting process here? And come back to you and say, okay, here's where we got jammed up. Here's where we think we're going with it, and move forward.
Doesn't it seem like if the county code sort of not picks and chooses, but goes for the conservative and looks at, let's say, of all the sign codes, the biggest sign can be 20 square foot. I'm making that up completely, but that's either the smallest or the biggest. If we pick the most conservative, those, for the most part, and then make sure that the rest of our side code does what we want it to, doesn't that kind of meet the issue of backstopping? In other words, if you can't go out and put a sign up that's 40 feet tall because there's no other place that allows it, they only allow a 10-foot one, and you can put a 10-foot one in those places, doesn't that kind of meet the standard of being conforming with the cities? Or is that not, am I not thinking about that?
We agree with you. We think that's the path. We think that's the path we start on. And I think maybe for the question that Anne brought up, and that maybe linked into what Bob is saying, maybe we end up defining non-conforming as structurally non-conforming. But we're not going to require you to put in the landscaping, because we know you can, turn that over the day you get annexed, put the landscaping in, and now you're conforming. So it could be that there are things that would technically make you non-conforming that are easily fixed. And I'm not sure, but we're going to try following the path that Nancy has found, that Matt Lafferty and Leslie and Matt Goebel and I were talking about earlier, and see where that takes us, and then come back with the problem places.
I think that's a good idea. Partly I've been thinking about the poor enforcement person going out there and trying to deal with multiple codes or multiple standards in different locations. And in some cases, just driving down the street a mile or so and having some different standard, and how on earth are they going to keep track of what's legal and what's not? And it's not only going to be them, but it's going to be zoning board of appeals at such time as variances are being applied for, and those types of things. And so it just becomes a nightmare to try to administer too many little tiny different sign standards on a countywide basis. As it is, we'd be talking about the urban character areas, the rural character areas, and we've been sort of kicking around the idea of potentially an I-25 corridor area, although almost all the commercial development along the I-25 corridor is happening in municipalities, so that may not be an issue for us.
Commissioner Stevens.
Yeah, this is a great discussion. I kind of fall where Nancy is. I think that kind of going probably with the most kind of conservative version of of the combination of all the municipality sign codes is probably a good place to start. I do think that certain signs are probably more problematic than others when we're talking about our neighbors. So my guess is that pole signs are I don't guess we'll have much trouble with awning signs is my suggest, is what I'm thinking. I think we're really largely talking about pole signs and electronic signs being probably the most problematic. I'm not a fan of billboards. I'm a Lady Bird Johnson person. I want the highway beautification. That clutter looked bad, and there's some really interesting pictures about what clutter looks like in Fort Collins in the 70s and until the sign codes changed, how unattractive the city was before it regulated its sign code. So I do think aesthetics are really important, and I think respecting all the communities, sign codes, but I'm sure we can find a happy medium in between some of these pole sizes and keeping that in mind. But my guess is, and having been on the Fort Collins City Council, the pole signs were the problems, right? I mean, it's the big sign or it's a flashing sign. And I agree. I don't think that electronic signs belong in rural areas. I don't know that they belong in urban areas that much too. They're very distracting for drivers. The brightness is an issue. I do worry about spillover of that brightness into areas where we have wildlife and we have natural areas. And so, those are some of the concerns that I have. I don't know that we get this, that we get it this perfect, right? I mean, I think we're going to do the best we can to accommodate the municipal neighbors sign codes. I don't want to adopt everyone's separate sign codes, and I don't want it to be confusing to people who are running a business by any means. But I think kind of adopting sort of something in the middle that makes sense, that we, where our neighbors would be, realizing that we're taking this seriously, and that we don't want to throw something up that's going to be offensive and that's going to make them angry. And that there again, I think it's really important for us to find out about the 7-year grandfathering of a sign, because I mean, if that's the case, I mean, why would somebody want to put up a sign that would only last for 7 years if they knew they were going to get annexed soon? I mean, on the Mulberry corridor, I mean, I'm not saying that annexation looks like it's not too far down the road. And so, I mean, it would do a disservice to a business to say, yes, you can put up this huge sign, And they invested a lot of money in it, especially electronic sign, to only take it down 7 years later. And so I do think that probably getting some clarity on that issue is really important, because that makes it even more important that we try to align our sign codes as much as we can. Thanks.
Any other comments from anybody before we move on? We still have just a little bit left. Commissioner Cavallis?
Thanks, Matt. I'll try to be brief and just add some 2 cents with a focus on the electronic messaging display signs. I basically agree with Ann and Kristen and others, I think, who have said that I believe there are certain parts of the county, rural areas where maybe it's not appropriate. I think along the I-25 corridor, in commercial areas, it's more appropriate. I'm not sure north of Highway 14 going up to Wyoming. I don't know if there are any of those electronic signs there. And so I don't know if you can, do regulations that say, well, within a certain area or south of Highway 14, that might not really be a good idea. And then the only other things I would add to the discussion about electronic signs is that we, if they're allowed in certain areas, that we're very mindful of night sky issues. And I understood that I understood that when we had some of these discussions with the sign approval on the Harmony corridor, that there were certain technologies that could help with issues related to the brightness and issues impacting night skies. So I think there are some technologies that maybe we want to incentivize or require. And then the last thing I'll say is the public safety thing. As far as the timing of the messaging, I think there's some researcher that shows, at 2 minutes, 60 seconds, that it has some impact on distraction and distracted drivers. So I think if we do allow these electronic signs in certain parts along the I-25 corridor, we want to be mindful of all of those things. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Shaddock McNally?
Thank you, Matt. I just want to echo my colleagues' comments, my fellow commissioners, and kind of reinforce my concern about the nighttime sky portion of it and the light pollution that we have. And I haven't really heard that talked about tonight. So I think that's something I'd like to also make sure we're mindful about. But I do agree with what my commissioner said about safety and lighting. And I do think that the approach is better to be down the road and conservative. I think it could be really complicated if we try to match all of these. So I just wanted to get my 2 cents in there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. Not seeing any other hands go up. We're going to let Elizabeth wrap up her presentation. I think we got one more little area to cover. And
that was a great conversation. Thanks, everybody. If anybody wants any of these to print out and put up in your office or next to your computer screen, just let me know. This is great, fun stuff. Okay. So along the lines of exactly where we are right now, we want to check in. We've got in the new zoning, the mixed center areas, which are areas in the county that are not urban, not GMA, but they have some flavor of commercial development, something going on where signage might be appropriate. And currently, the way that we are moving the regulations forward is we're taking the urban, the residential, and the non-residential standards, and we're assigning them out to the right districts. So we're not making big changes in people's expectations. But we know that this has come up. Signage around Red Feather Lakes has come up previously, possibly LaPorte. And we just wanted to check in and see if we think that the current regulations will get us there. So if we recognize that these are areas with some commercial or perhaps industrial development, and they should have the same sort of signage as other places in the county that get non-residential signage, or if there's something unique about anything in the mixed center areas that we want to talk about as we move the regulations forward. So just an opportunity to focus on some of the special places in the county and make sure we're okay. That's it. I don't have like 82 slides on this one. Sorry to let you guys down on that.
I wish to bring up something.
Yes, sir.
Matt, may I do that? Yes.
Please do.
Thank you. Regarding Red Feather Lakes, I know Matt's aware of this issue and others. You know, one of the things that folks have expressed concern about, the business community up there, is this, they're referred to as TODs, tourist oriented directional signs. And it's kind of a weird setup where CDOT oversees the permitting of those signs, and there's a company that they contract with. But historically, there have been problems with the bureaucracy associated with, if there's a business person who wants to put up a sign, they have to apply, CDOT has to approve the permit, and then this company installs and then is supposed to maintain these signs. And they're meant to help, direct, tourists and others, to the various businesses in Red Feather Lakes, and maybe the issue applies in LaPorte. So I'm wondering if what is that, if that's being addressed, or are we able to address that with our local land use code regulations here? Matt, can you help me with that, Matt?
Commissioner Kafalis, our TODS program is operated through the engineering department as a separate tool associated with road signage and that type of stuff. So it's very specific to road signage. For those that may not be familiar with TODS program, it's usually those signs you see along state highways that are blue that say, hey, this is what's coming up at the next exit, or the signs sometimes are in brown that give locations to areas of interest or other things like that. And we have that TODS program, but it's administered separately by our county engineering department. So we'll have to touch base with them to see how to make modifications to that.
Well, if I may, Matt, I appreciate that, and I think I understand all of that. And with regard to Todd's signs, it's CDOT oversees that on for example, Red Feather Lakes Road on non state or interstate highways. And my understanding is that one of the provisions in this updating of the sign code is that there's a requirements around maintenance, maintaining these signs. And I think one of the concerns that folks have expressed up there is that the company that's supposed to maintain these signs is not doing an adequate job. And I don't know whether or not, there's an intersection between engineering and what they do and what we do, to make sure that if they're responsible for installing these signs, they also have a responsibility to make sure they're not falling over. If they fall over, they're going to repair them.
Yep. And that's certainly something that we can discuss with engineering and CDOT. And you're right. The county has a program and CDOT has a program. They're parallel programs, and we use the same company for the issuance of how that permit gets approved and how the sign gets put into place. And so we should look into that with engineering. I think it's a separate issue from the sign code. But we'll take a look at it and touch base with Mark Peterson this week. Anybody else got any questions or comments about, the idea of now that we're moving away from the municipal areas, there's still areas of the county that have like Red Feather or Glen Haven or Pinewood Springs or areas like that, or maybe a Masonville that, have some commercial activities, and we certainly want to provide them with fair opportunity for signage. But we should probably create some sort of a system that is universal to all of them, that they're not all unique in themselves, but something that we can do on that's not just generally administered across the rural sections of the
Matt, I would think you already have that to some degree when you're talking about the permanent sign regulations by character area, like the paragraph 8.4 and those tables. I think it would really be a help if everyone on the board would take a time to really look at those and think about those in comparison to what we have now and what we've had in the past, because it's a lot of material. And I have to say, I just, having read it quickly, seems to me that if everybody should take some time to do input on those particular issues. You've got the mixed center there, you have the urban center, you have those kinds of things. So maybe focusing on that as a conversation is what we should do. But I think now that it's come to our attention, we probably need to do that more, or at least pay more attention to it.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I guess I'd like to hear, and I don't know how much outreach we do on this and if we've heard from folks, but I guess I would sort of defer to what the residents in those areas are thinking. I think it's really important to make sure that we're listening to those voices in those areas, and also kind of protecting their aesthetic, the aesthetic that they want for their part of the county. So I guess without knowing that, it's hard for me to comment, but just to say that I would like to know, just because they're not in a municipality doesn't mean that they don't have a community aesthetic that they'd like to see. And I would really like to support that. I guess that would be my feeling on it. So without knowing it, except, I mean, clearly John has had some conversations in Red Feather, but so, and I agree with Nancy. I think, maybe more looking at it more in depth, but if we could do any outreach to some of the communities that might be affected, I think that could be really important information to have.
That's a very good point. We did send emails out of a lot of the information when we did our questionnaire, as well as this draft has been sent out, but it's hard to find people to send it to. So I sent it to people like the Chamber of Commerce, because they'll put it in contact with the business community up there, and the Board of Realtors, because they'll make contacts with some of their people and whatnot. So I've tried to attack the problem as best I can, but we might do better by posting some flyers in the areas maybe, and doing some other things to get people's attention.
Hey, Matt, have we been able to send the information to the Red Feather Lakes Planning Advisory Committee and the LaPorte Planning Advisory Committee?
We haven't, but that's a very good suggestion. I'll get that sent out to them tomorrow, Commissioner Falls.
Thank you, sir.
As well as the Estes Valley Committee. We have
the Estes Valley Planning Advisory, yes, of course.
Try to hit that, and maybe the Rural Land Use Board and Ag Board, because they are a rural part of the community and they could look at it from those perspectives.
That might be a good segue to talk about the upcoming public events around this topic.
Which I think was the last thing that we were going to talk about. It should be coming up here pretty quick.
We have one temporary sign question that we can skip forward to the outreach. Your call. Yeah. Okay. So lots of stuff going on with this code, and our time frame to keep it moving, and kind of reach out and hear what everybody has to say. I think probably, if you guys don't mind, Matt and Leslie have briefed this a couple times, and I don't want to go through it and make it any different than it is. So can I let you guys take this one and move forward?
Sure.
Thank you.
So just similar to the oil and gas schedule, Leslie has done a wonderful job of helping me come up with a schedule on this. So what we're thinking is, right now, the draft sign code is on the Larimer County webpage. We did do an email notice to, I don't know, probably 50 or 60 people that were, I noticed all the sign companies that I could find, and like I said, the chambers of commerce for various areas, Board of Realtors, those types, to see if we could get the word out on the street on this. It's gone out on our spotlight activity on the county webpage as well. So we're hoping that draft is out there, and hopefully people start looking at it. Our expectation is that after people have had an opportunity of of a couple of weeks of looking at it, that we would come back on March the 25th and have a public virtual open house type meeting and hear what the community has to say about these draft regulations, give us their input and see what they've got to say. And then once we're done with that, we would certainly then take and revise that draft, update it based upon all the input that we received, and then again put out a public hearing draft, and people would have an opportunity at that point to review the public hearing draft and prepare themselves to make public comment at the hearings and whatnot. And we can have another virtual open house if we have to, or if we need to, around that subject matter as well. So we're trying to put some meeting opportunities in there. Some of these topics generate a large number of people, some of them a handful. I know that tonight we have at least 5 or 6 attendees that are very interested in this subject, and we are receiving emails and comments on this as we go through the process. So I'll make sure that tomorrow that I hit a couple of more opportunities for notice, so that maybe we can spread the word to the people that live in the communities, not necessarily the business operators, because we all are affected by the signage in different ways. Anybody want to add to that or take from that, or have any grand suggestions of who I might notice in addition to that? I think you're all tired, and it's been a good conversation tonight. I think it was really actually a really good conversation about signage. I hope that we can continue to engage this way on future subject matters, and that we certainly appreciate all your input.
Matt, I just had another idea as far as outreach, if I may. Well, like with the Red Feather Lakes, there is the Crystal Lakes Road and Road Association. And I'm not really sure about this, Matt and colleagues, whether or not there's any added value to informing, some of those rural areas like Livermore or Red Feather Lakes, they have fire protection districts. And should first responders have an opportunity, I really don't know, to weigh in on the sign code, because maybe that has implications for safety or something. I'm not really sure.
Okay. Very good suggestion.
Yeah.
Thank
That's
you.
what I get paid for, Matt. I get paid the big bucks to make at least half the time good suggestions.
You do wonderful. Thank you. Anybody else? Well, not seeing anybody jumping at this last issue, I think that we can go ahead and wrap tonight up. I'll let Commissioner Choate and Kafalis take us to close out the meeting.
Commissioner Choate, you're on.
Well, I'll just say thanks, everybody. This has been a fantastic meeting, very interesting. It'll be interesting to see where it goes from here. I don't have any further comments than to say thank you all for your rapt participation. And it's these are big changes that can and will make beneficial effects for our community for decades. And it's time that we do it.
Thank you.
Very briefly, I just wish to echo Bob or Commissioner Choate's comments. And I'm just grateful that folks really are informed. They try to, offer constructive comments. We all do, and I think that moves us forward in a very good direction.
Thanks. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time tonight. And with that, I think we can say goodnight. Enjoy your weekend. Hopefully it doesn't snow more than 81 inches.
Yeah.
Stay hanging there, Abby.
Yeah, thank you.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night, John. Good night, Commissioner Falls.